Hi, welcome back. So we are at the second outline, and that is to quickly understand the concept of property and object-oriented language, and in particular in Python. Throughout the section so far that we have learned, we have been focusing on the separation of behaviors and data. This is very important in object-oriented programming, but we are about to see that in Python, the distinction can be really blurry. Now, before we get into the details, let's just discuss some of the bad object-oriented theory from the perspective of other languages. Like Java, for example, they are notorious because they teach us to never access the attribute directly. They insist that we should write attribute access like this. Let me move to Visual Studio Code and show you what I'm trying to say. Let's create here a class and call it color class. And here let's define a function with a dunder, let's call it init, which actually receive two arguments. One, let's call it the RGB value, and one, let's call it the name. Here we could say that self dot the RGB is equal to RGB, and then self dot the name is equal to the name. Now here you could see that I use the underscore because I want to imply these are kind of a private variable. Using them must be clearly reasonable. Now let's define it from the perspective of those languages. You must define a function called set the name, which basically, of course, gonna inherit the self and the name, and then what is going to do, it just will say self dot this name is equal to the name, and one more function to get the name. Now once again, inherit from this and take the name, and here we go. It's going to just return the self dot name. Now this is the style we have learned in some other languages, and in fact it works. Now the variable are prefixed, as I said, with the underscore to suggest that they are private. Now we have this set and get, and what we can do now, we can just implement in a course. So for example, I could just go and define or instantiate this object from color, and then what I could do, if I want to get the name of that, I have to reach this way. I want to set the name again with some changes. Here is requesting you to pass the name here. Let's say it only red. And then I can just once again reach out to the variable by calling the get name. So just let me hold it with a print. And here we go. If I can run this one more time, bright red, everything is okay. Now, this is not nearly as readable as a direct access version in Python flavor. So Python has a different flavor to do that instead of using the set and the act. So from Python perspective, if I would have to make some changes by removing this RGB in the name and just leave everything as it is, what I could do, I don't need these anymore in some sort of speak. And then I just could go and say, well, I want to actually print the c.the name, something like that. So if I would have to run this one more time, could see everything is working. This is from Python perspective, right? And maybe if I would have to say c.name is equal to red one more time, here we go, everything is working. So this is the perspective. And so why would anyone insist upon this using base syntax method? Well, the reasoning is that someday we may want to add extra code when a value is set or retrieved. For example, we want to decide to cache the value and return the cache value. Or maybe we want to validate the value is suitable for certain input or not. So you could see from that perspective, the idea of using set and get is very legitimate. Now in code, we could decide to change, for example, the set name method, which we have just deleted here. Let me get back to that. In this case, for example, if we have decided at some level to make check, if not name, it means somebody did not actually pass the name, I want to raise an exception error. And then here, if I want to set the name again, but this time I'm passing an empty string, this should throw an error for me. And that's exactly what happened. So he printed the first line, and then when he wanted to set the new name empty, he set exception invalid name. So we cannot actually pass that line. This is very important. This is the reason why we use set and get. Python give us what's called a property keyword to make the method looks like an attribute rather than a method. Here they are method. You can see from the opening of this particular brackets. The property here, it looks like it's an attribute rather than a method. An attribute, just like I'm accessing name or RGB directly. We can therefore write our code to use direct member access. So let me show you what Python would look like if they want to use this call of attribute. So I'm gonna keep everything as it is, just RGB don't have to be private anyway. We're not setting just for example. I'm gonna add one more line here. After this function, I will call this attribute call a name, decorated with these two brackets called a property. Here we're gonna call on those functions that I need. So both functions actually will now be attached with this name attribute. So if I will have to actually test that one more time, if I instantiate this object called C, I want to print C.name. Now, if I would run this one, I should run into an error. Why this error? Say this color.setName is missing what required. So in fact, when I am calling this property, he's going to follow the bracket. So I put set name and then the get name. And if you remember, the set name, of course, require an argument. So when I call set name, he's going to set name first before the get name. And that's what the problem here. So in this case, we have to change the order to make sure everything is going to work correctly. So I'm going to add here set name now. Now it should work. Everything is correct. If we run yes as expected. Also, I could say C.name is equal to another color. Let's make the print sentence, and everything should be actually still working very well. This is a very, very important concept. If I would have to make any changes, change a letter or something like that, I don't have to worry if somebody have used this attribute. So they are encapsulating everything behind the scene. Now, this is the concept of a property, and from here we could actually build in and try to talk much more in details. That's exactly what we're supposed to do in the next. I will see you then.